sometimes we feel that life hits you from all sides. You think of all the planning that Tolkien had to do to say, I'm going to us to the pit of despair, and then we're going to be pulled out because we had that fellowship. Aragorn is relying on Frodo and Sam, and yet so Merry and Pippin, and they're all doing their job. And it is beautiful. It is like, to me, an orchestra.
Welcome to the Recap Book Chat. We are a mother and daughter duo
Conversing about books over a cup of joe.
seeking truth to help us glow.
Ready, set, let's grow!
Greetings! Today we are diving in to a classic. We're finishing the trilogy, a very famous trilogy, one that we have loved going through. It is The Return of the King, the last in the Lord of the Rings trilogy by
J.R.R. Tolkien,
written in
1955. If you don't know what J.R.R. Tolkien, his name was John Ronald Reuel. I was just curious about that, so I looked
That's
it up.
interesting.
So why do you think it was written, Kate? That's the big why.
Well, when I looked it up, The Lord of the Rings was primarily written to create a very rich and mythic legendarium, is what it said, for England. And because J.R.R. Tolkien, he loved languages, he loved lore and mythology and things, and he said the English language didn't really have that because he studied all these other cultures. And so he really wanted to create that for England and to tell a long, deeply moving tale about good and evil and friendship and the struggles of ordinary people in extraordinary times. And also, that was a big reason for it. And the other why was because it grew out of the publishers that had published The Hobbit that was in 1937, his first one, and they kept requesting a sequel about hobbits. So those two things are really the why that we have the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Well said. What about the setting? Can you tell us a little bit about? And I think it's funny because the boys have a show that they like, Tuttle Twins, and there's one in there called Lord of the Nose Rings, and that takes place in Center Earth. So I know about the Tuttle Twins. So where does this one take place?
So we're continuing the saga. So we're still in Middle Earth, which is a fantasy world that J.R.R. Tolkien created. Tolkien, pardon me. And this is the final phase of the War of the Ring. So when you start, there's a city being besieged, minus Tirth. It's in Gondor. You go through some of the settings in these haunted paths of the dead. We are at the Black Gates of Mordor. And at the end, we kind of circle back to the Shire. So that's really that's where we're at, and that's where this book lives. The fate of the world is hanging on the destruction of one ring. And it's just imperative. And that's how it kicks off. So you're really in it when you jump into the Return of the King. That's the setting. So let's talk about the main characters. Let's do a roll call for the main characters. Why don't you kick us off?
And there are a plethora of characters, but I would start with Frodo. I would put Frodo first. He is a hobbit that was given the ring, and that's what started the whole trilogy from Bilbo. And I did get a quote later on. I will give a quote for each of these main characters. But you cannot say Frodo without saying Sam Gamgee, because bond between Sam and Frodo, it's beautiful. It is beautiful. It reminded me of Jonathan and David in the Bible. It's that kind of bond. the bond strengthen if you have a good bond, it will strengthen you and the other person as well. So, that would be the first 2, and then Gandalf, who's probably the most famous, I would think, probably, wizard that I know of, but I mean, how many wizards do I know? A Wizard of Oz, but that was a fake wizard. Okay, here we have a real wizard. So Gandalf ranks high, and then Aragorn, which those were my first 4. Aragorn has another name, Strider, which it's not a Russian novel. You don't get confused like that. You know, he doesn't have 4 different names, but it it is he does change throughout the trilogy. So he started out Strider, goes to Aragorn, and then you can step back a little bit, and the other hobbits were Merry and Pippin, kind of for comedic relief in the book. A lot of there's some funny, humorous parts in the book that don't really all happen in the movies. Of course, I have only seen one of the movies. And then Legolas, the archer, he's very, very gifted with the bow, and then Gimli, the dwarf. So we have hobbits, we have a wizard, we have a man, and then we have elf. And actually, there are some trees. There's trees in this too, but I didn't put them down. That's quite a roll call. I mean, whoa. Anybody you care to add? Can you add someone?
Well, I think you covered them. You did say you didn't say you said Legolas was an archer. He's an elf. So I'll add that elf archer. Yeah, the Frodo the weary ring bearer, Sam the loyal gardener, Gandalf the resurrected wizard. So he's Gandalf the White. So he's more powerful in this than he was in the Fellowship, which is important. And Aragorn the reluctant heir to claim his throne. And I love that you pulled out his other names. And I think just in the Bible, how like Abram becomes Abraham and he steps into his identity, his true identity. We see that with Aragorn. He's reluctant to become a king because he doesn't want to fail and become corrupted by power. And so he's reluctant to do that, but I love seeing the transformation of him. We've slowly seen it, but obviously the return of the king, you can tell by the title what that means. We see him full force step into his identity and look out. And I think that's true across the board. We see Sam do that. Look out when someone is truly stepping into their identity. And the Pippin I thought was interesting because he was pretty mischievous early on. Like, if you remember the Fellowship of the Rings, kinda getting into some rockets and always kind of getting into things he shouldn't have. But really that energy, like, plays off well later on because he becomes a knight of Gondor. So that bravery and that comes into play. The only 2 people I would add would be Gollum. So we've got the bad guys. So Gollum is this wretched, ring-obsessed creature who you've seen early on. He's very interesting and almost a ring addicted, you could say. But he has this unintended role that's vital with the ring that comes into play. And I love how J.R.R Tolkien wrote that because in The Hobbit, Bilbo had a chance to kill Gollum, but he took pity on him. He had compassion for him. He just thought, he's just a miserable creature. I could kill him, but he didn't. And when Gandalf was telling that to Frodo, Frodo was like, I wish he would have killed him. And Gandalf, he had such a good quote, but basically it was like, don't wish to take a life so easily. Like, and he may have an important role yet that we don't know about. And he did. And Gandalf was right, and he comes into play. And then, of course, the main villain is Sauron. And he's the unseen Dark Lord, and it's his hatred and malice and evil that really is driving this final war. And he lost a lot of power from a previous battle, like thousands of years ago. And so, but he's been slowly gaining power, and now he's this all-seeing eye. Not all-seeing, it's an eye that can see far, but it has to be looking for what it's seeing. So that's what they're dealing with. And then there's kind of side characters would be Denethor and Theoden. So Theoden was the king of Rohan, which we talked about that in the last book, Wormtail, who really had him under this spell, but he becomes redeemed by going into battle. He kinda comes back. But then we see Denethor, and he's not even a king, he's the steward of Gondor. He's supposed to be taking care of Gondor while there is no king, and he's very despairing. So, yeah. So
I did forget the ladies. I'm so sorry, oversight on my part, but I did not write them down. But there especially there's one, and I don't wanna have a spoiler alert because if anyone but that fought like a man, and everybody thought she was one, and that's a famous quote. They had no idea that she was put herself in harm's way, and there's a true story, actually, in the Revolutionary War, Deborah Sampson, and she did the same thing in real life, wrapped herself up and fought, but when she was wounded, it was discovered that she was not a man, but that is in the Revolutionary War. So, if you think, "Oh, it's far-fetched," everyone would know. Mary was right there, didn't know until she takes off her helmet and then, "I am a woman." Well, then you're like, "Whoa." And that was a pivotal scene. There's so many pivotal parts to the book, and I am so grateful that we did read it because it is a tomb, but it is like 3 steps, but wow. And little by little, I had a quote, and this is so simple, I'm just gonna throw it out here. Still, every little is a gain. So even if you started and read a little, it's a gain. At first, I thought, "Did I write that down right?" But it's still every little is a gain because the soldiers weren't making a lot of progress and they were getting discouraged, but someone in that group said, "Still, every little is a gain." So, just wanted to add the girls, and then, of course, Aragorn's love and there's a ton of backstory in the appendages. I don't know how many pages of the elfin alphabets back there, genealogy, appendages. Hey, I guess my fingers have been bothering me. Appendages. No, appendix, yeah.
another quote that kinda went with the one that you said, I thought was good, is, yet the deeds will not be less valiant because they are unpraised." And I thought that was really good. So, you mentioned 3 questions that Kelly Gallagher or Gallahan?
Gallagher.
Gallagher asked, and I thought those were really good. What does it say? What does it mean? What does it matter? So, what does it say?
Well, Tolkien, he took a story and developed it in such a way that a lot of authors, in such a way that leaves no gaps. There were no gaps. And I think the time it took in a world before there was devices that were distracting, the hours he spent on writing this out, years, the time, 12 years to write it in total. And so and I don't know about you, but I actually feel like I have been with Frodo and Sam and Aragorn. When it said Fellowship of the Ring, I feel like I'm in the fellowship. And I now understand because I actually did not understand the rereading of this. But once I've read it, oh, definitely. It would be like revisiting a good friend. I get it. And that to me, that's how he said it. His craft as a writer was so different to me than any that I've read. What about you? What do you think?
I think that's really good. Like what you said there, I love how you said there was no gaps. This is one of the rare books I can say when I finished it, I was okay with it because I expected it to end probably 3 or 4 chapters before it did, and he kept going. And so I feel like he covered all the bases. I had all of the closure I needed. I didn't think I would get enough closure, but he did it. He made sure that that it everything was closed completely. So I love how you said there's no gaps. I think he answered all of my questions.
Well, they always say wrap it up, put a bow on it for a good story. He wrapped it up. He put a bow on it. He hand delivered it. I mean, I agree totally. There was no but what if? But that's unclear. I'm confused. What happened here? And I usually always have at least a question after a book. But you are right. At the end of this book, I did not have questions. So you are so true. You nailed it. Now, level 2, we're going to level up. Level 2 says, what does it mean? What do you think? The story, what does this mean? And I think here we're talking about themes and the overall picture, and then we'll go to level 3. But what do you think on that?
So the themes that we see, obviously good and evil, that glares out at you, good and evil. We see loyalty, love, sacrifice, mercy, pity, free will. I really liked there's this whole elevation of the humble that we see. And then the hope versus despair is a theme that plays out over and over. And I think two characters that really epitomize that are Sam and Denethor. So both of these characters are put in very hopeless situations. Sam, in the pit of the Mount Doom, he is able to have some hope and keep going. And then we see on the opposite side Denethor, who gave up way before the battle had even came to his front door. He had already given up and in despair. I love how J.R.R Tolkien wrote about that and pulled that out and showed you don't never give up. Never lose hope. And then also an overarching theme is the corrupting influence of power, which that goes into the symbolism, and we see that symbolized in the ring. It is this allure of power, and it corrupts people. Even the best of people it can corrupt. And so absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's why I appreciate our forefathers who tried to make sure that there was checks and balances to keep from having one person with absolute power, because they knew this. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's kind of a symbol. And then the destruction of the ring is symbolic of the defeat of sin, and that with the defeat of sin there has to be a sacrifice. So I thought that was interesting. We see that play out. The white tree of Gondor was a symbol for the right kingship, which we talked about Aragorn stepping up and taking his place. And that goes back, we've talked about that a lot, that for evil to prevail, all it takes is for good men to do nothing. So when Aragorn is stepping up and taking his rightful place, we're seeing a lot of things restored, kingdoms restored, getting back to where they should be. But it takes sacrifice and it takes really stepping into your identity. And then the last symbol I had was eagles. Because the eagles, they come in at the end and they are a symbol of divine intervention in moments of the most utter need. Because there's a part at the end when some characters are just there, the situation is dire. It's really, how are you going to get out of this? And then eagles fly in. So I J.R.R Tolkien knows how to use symbols, and he used them to the full, and themes. And I probably missed a bunch. Again, this is my first time through. I am like you, I would love to go through it again because so many good things. But that leads us to our level 3. What does it matter?
And you hit on it with the themes like good versus evil. Well, that's why it matters, because we are living in a world where it is good versus evil. And when you want to be inspired, whether you're a young person or an older person, to have a tale woven as finely as this one was woven is very inspiring, uplifting, motivating, and it leaves you hopeful. Like good can win over evil, but it's going to be hard and it's not going to be easy. And we have to do things we don't want to do. I have to highlight Aragorn again because he was one of the most humble people in the whole book. He had been a ranger, which had kind of been looked down on. And it's funny to me that in the movie, he wasn't even cast in the part where he's there and they said there was nobody in the chair when they're filming the movie, they did not have an Aragorn. And the hobbits are pretending that they're and they go back later, and of course he did get the role and everything, but I'm like, he wanted to protect people, but when you said without the praise, so here's Elrond, the elf king, and he says, "Put aside the ranger, become who you were born to be." So he's telling him, and how many of us, as we are living our life, we're not who we were born to be. But that's scary. He knew how to be a ranger. He had been a ranger, and to have now this is thrust upon him. But I loved that part where Gandalf says, "The board is set, the pieces are moving." In this book, it's action. I mean, there is, and the pieces are moving in different places. So you have action over here. Sam and Frodo, they're over in another place, and there's 3 different sets of action going on. And sometimes we feel that life hits you from all sides. And you think of all the planning that Tolkien had to do to say, "I'm gonna us to the pit of despair, and then we're gonna be pulled out," because we had that fellowship. Aragorn is relying on Frodo and Sam, and yet so are Merry and Pippin, and they're all doing their job. And it is beautiful. It is like, to me, an orchestra. And everybody, you have the conductor up there, and he's telling everybody, but if there was a man up there waving a stick, that's nothing. But when everybody does what they're supposed to do, it is magical. It is. And it's so uplifting that I mean, I've wanted to get in the battle myself. I'm like, okay, let's go. What about you? I mean,
I think that's beautiful, and I love the analogy of the orchestra because it's what a beautiful way to envision that, and even someone like Gimli, who is this kind of coarser, stout, he's a warrior, but when he stepped into his role, like, he's making huge changes too. His friendship with Legolas, he's bridging an ancient,
divide.
a divide that had lasted between the elves and the dwarves. And so when we're seeing that played out over and over, when people step into their identity, the beautiful things that can come of that. And that was actually my level 3. Like, what did it mean to me was really about the identity. And that there's a beautiful part when Frodo cannot go on and Sam says, "I may not be able to carry the ring, but I can carry you." And it just hit me because his identity was not the ring bearer. That was not his job. That wasn't what he was called to do. He was called to support the ring bearer, to help the ring bearer get to where he needed to go. And it is hard to be in a supporting role. And a lot of times people they want, "Oh, I want to be that," but he never wanted to be Frodo. His whole mission was to help Frodo. So we see him just I love that. I was like, "Wow, that is just stepping into your role." And when he's carrying Frodo, so I so and then Aragorn is the whole identity thing about stepping into his true identity. And it's funny because a lot of people would want to be king. We saw Boromir would have loved that. He would have he wanted to be king, and it's interesting that Aragorn doesn't. So a lot of people want what they don't have. Majority of people aren't gonna be the king. Majority of people wanna be the king. So I think it's a good thing that he didn't want that. Like you said, he was very humble in that. But great point about the orchestra and yeah, it's so beautiful. So well done. Like you said, the camaraderie and what we can accomplish when we work together. Because really they were not picked to win. But
Oh,
they went with and they were underestimated by Sauron. They did a lot of things like even the hobbits. They're seen as lesser people. They're seen as not a threat. And that's what actually helped the fellowship the most is even the Treebeard and all that, they were overlooked. And that was the second book when they took over Isengard. So pride does come before the fall. And so we see that play out. So now we're at the favorite quote section. What was some of your favorite quotes?
Go we can go back and forth if you want to, but, I had my word, plethora of quotes. But I'll start with Legolas because I think this kinda sums up where they are the ones that are having to like you said, they are coming from behind, you might say. And he says, "Oft hope is born when all is forlorn." Of course, I like that because it kinda rhymes a little bit, has a good cadence to it, but isn't that good? I mean, it's beautiful. And I had another one about Frodo. He said, "It is useless to meet revenge with revenge. It will heal nothing."
That's good.
And I think as you're reading that, in many books, they go so fast, you don't really feel the wear and tear on your character. You feel it with Frodo. You feel the heaviness of the ring. You feel for him the weakness. It's weakening him so much and changing him. And I know my least favorite character was the Denethor guy, but it was evil creeping in, and he let that. What is Tolkien telling us with this? Evil can change you, it can influence you, and it can be done without you knowing it.
That's good. That's true. But I think the difference you mentioned Frodo and Denethor, Frodo fought it. Denethor gave in to it. So even though it did change both of them, Frodo ended up in a better place because of fighting it. And that was the thing about the hobbits that was their superpower that nobody knew about was that purity. They had um this pure, loving, like, happiness. Hobbits were just they're very happy, joyful, they wanna have fun, lighthearted,
Innocent.
innocent. So they don't that's a great word, and so that was something a lot of people in Middle-earth didn't even know that hobbits existed, and it's so interesting that Gandalf somehow knew that that would be a superpower, a hidden superpower, and that comes into play when things get pretty rough. The hobbits still remember that inner light is able to help them shine through. And I did have one for Frodo, and this is at the end of the book, but I feel like this is powerful.
Is it this one? "There is no real going back." Was that part of it?
Read the whole
And
thing.
well, you go ahead and find it, but I thought that was powerful because how many times in life do you say, "Well, I won't get to go, I won't be able to be there, but we'll meet again sometime. We'll do that. We'll go back and do it another time." There is no going back. There is no going back, and Frodo knew that, but he says it eloquently. Did you find the whole quote?
Yeah. So he said, "There is no real going back. Though I may come to the Shire, it will not seem the same, for I shall not be the same. I am wounded with knife, sting, and tooth, and a long burden. Where shall I find rest?" And this is so powerfully written because J.R.R Tolkien had walked in trenches. He had been in wartime. He lost friends. In a sense, I think he is Frodo. He has that heavy burden of war, and I think this had to be therapeutic for him to write this line, to grieve that you literally lost your home after you've been at war. You come back, but it's not the same. You can't enjoy it the same because you're different. And so I bet J.R. Tolkien experienced that, and I think being able to express it had to be therapeutic, but I love him for doing that because it helps us understand when soldiers go off to war and we say, "Oh, thank you for your sacrifice," I don't know if we fully understand the extent because it's not just you're sacrificing a few years here and there, but you come back different.
And I can't off the top of my head list all the books we've read where, a person came back from war, but I know that, like, what popped into my mind was The Great Alone. The father was totally, unhinged. Ordinary Grace is a great one because he says in there, the father, "Everyone deals with war in his own way. just kinda like grief. Everyone has to deal with it. The Call of the Canyon, how those guys came back from World War One and were shunned by the girls and all that. Maisie Dobbs, another one. There's a high price that is paid. And you're right, I think it's kind of like a rote thing, "Thank you for your service," but you're right, do we really say a prayer for them for healing? Because, wow, it's powerful. I have more quotes. Do you have any more?
Yeah, go with the next quote.
Well, I'll do a Gandalf graze through here. "No need to brood on what tomorrow may bring. Positivity." Of course, I love Gandalf. Another one that he said was, and this was to bolster Pippin, because Pippin is down on himself. He's made a mistake, but he came back strong, and he's very brave, like you said. This is not what hobbits were designed to do. And I loved this because it's Gandalf being the mentor that he is to all of them. And as for valor, that cannot be computed by stature. Is that not? I mean, it's powerful. And then his wisdom showed in when he's talking about Denethor, and Denethor is brooding about Boromir's death, and he has another son, Faramir, right there. But no, it's all about Boromir. And very succinctly, Gandalf said he loved him greatly, too much perhaps. And I just imagine that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had many, many discussions on that, because C.S. Lewis, in several of his books, he talked about there being a parent loving a child too much, that it smothers them, that it thwarts their growth and all that. And I can hear them talking about it. And that's a big lesson for us all, to let people love is not doing everything for someone, and it's not wrapped up in them. It's in letting them grow. And that is, I'm just like, wow. And I did have one for Sam. Sam says, "Talking won't mend nothing," which I love that. And this is Aragorn. You know what we should have done? I should have read the quote and see if you could have guessed the character. No. Maybe
Aragorn.
"I deem the time unripe. I have no mind for strife, except with our enemy and his servants." He did not mess around with fighting among themselves. We are focused. And what a leader. And then Lady Galadriel, which we did not mention her, but not a main character, but very important. And this is four words. Use well the days. That's my last one, but I love it. Use well the days. That's motivational for me.
Use well the days. I mean, that could be on a t-shirt.
That's true. And there was one last one with Gandalf. I forgot about it, but when they go back to the Shire, he tells the hobbits, "You must settle its affairs yourselves. That is what you have been trained for." And I'm sure they were going, "Trained? We've been trained." They had depended on Gandalf. He's pulling back and letting them handle it. That's beautiful too. There's so many, you cannot assign one thing to this. There are so many layers and depth, but that's what you were trained for. And that's what God is doing for us. Like, there's so many places where you can draw something from the Bible. You can see where he's going. Like, there is one part where Sam is exhausted. He's spent. And then his love for Frodo rose above his other thoughts. He's giving Frodo the water, he's doing everything. But that's what we're supposed to be about Christ. Our love for Christ will do things we don't want to do. Like, we'll help, we'll we won't get offended. I mean, our love for Christ should so guide us that we are consumed by it, where we forget our own worries. And that's what Sam did. He was hungry, he was thirsty, he never said anything. He just took care of Frodo. It was beautiful.
I have a quote that goes with that. It goes with what you were saying. "In that hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm, but also deep down in him lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sense. He knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden." So, but I love that what you said. It was his love and loyalty to his master. And I think I read before that J.R.R Tolkien had part of that was inspired out of World War One. A lot of the officers would have servants that went with them, and I don't know if you call them servant, I can't remember what you call it, but it was kind of a servant where they bring them tea and different things like that, but that they got really close in the trenches because and they had that similar relationship, that loyalty of Sam and that love really trying to serve and help them do their job well. So, that was good. My favorite one, which was hard if I had to pick a favorite one, but I went with this one. Again, this involves Sam. There, peeping among the cloud rack above the dark, tore high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up from the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him, in that the end of the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. So powerful, and I think that for me just kind of encompasses this whole book, that yes, there is evil and there's this shadow and it's hard to see sometimes, but seek and ye shall find. And Sam is looking and he just sees this in the land of Mordor. It's so evil. I mean, even everything around it, oh, there's no vegetation, everything's dead. And this heaviness hangs in the air. This toxicity literally hangs in the air. It's hard to breathe. Darkness, clouds, so you're not getting a lot of light. And in the middle of all that, Sam is looking for he's looking up for hope, and that star reminds him something evil's not gonna win. Something is more powerful beyond evil. This is just for a small time. Loved it. So we come to the end, and we are trying something new with a one-word summary. So, one word that would summarize the return of the king.
I had two, and I cannot decide. Purpose and identity. I can't pick because they all had to become their identity, discover who they were and their purpose. So, purpose and identity kind of might be the same thing, but I feel like it was powerful. You can't hardly say a word that wouldn't fit. You know, you think perseverance, resilience, determination, but it does come down to identity because Frodo was more than he thought he was. Sam was more than he thought he was. And Aragorn was more than he thought he was. That we got to see this all come together and be part of the journey. And that we can work on our identity so we can be who God purposed us to be. Because purpose and identity go hand in hand. So hopefully you'll let me have two.
Well, you should have stuck with one because you took mine, but no, it's okay. You went with purpose and identity. I had identity in my head, but we
You see how they're linked?
they're very much linked. So my second, if I had to go with a second since you took identity, but this is a good one. I agree 100%. Another one would be hope. Because again, I feel like that we saw that play out with Sam and Denethor, and we saw how important hope is and how damaging despair is. So, an identity, yes, stepping into identity, but I do think even with the right identity, you do have to have hope. So, there's something, so we could go with identity and hope or purpose and hope. But, and that's hard to sum it up in one word, but man, what a phenomenal read. I highly recommend it to everyone.
I do too. I shout out to Josiah once again, a student, probably 2 years would say, "I needed to read that. I needed to read that." And then you got me this really cool copy where it's all one, and I loved it. I love that. We hope that you read it. We really do. We really do. You will thank us later. And even if it's much later, that's okay. I do believe you are gifted a book at the time when it will help you most. And I think we need to give ourselves grace, but also embrace a challenge of reading a tougher book and maybe one that you have put off. We appreciate you so much.
Wasn't there a quote by somebody that said, "When the student is ready, the teacher will appear."
Yeah, maybe you're gonna switch it around and say, "When the reader is ready, the book will appear."
I think we could go with that. But that is a wrap on The Return of the King and the entire Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien.
We thank you for joining us on our reading journey as we reflect.
To connect.
Catch you on the next one.